So, I woke up this morning and this tool, which needed painting, has been pending for a while. So, here it goes. In the past, I have spent quite a lot of time and still wish to spend quite a lot of time in my IDEs and different configurations and terminals. But unfortunately, my real life at work revolves around keynotes and PowerPoints and Excels and Figma, or more or less FigJam, and Teams and emails and numbers, and a lot of discussion and communication here and there. I must say I miss the tactility and the experimentation at work. Divorcing from that means burying a part of me, which I'm not ready to do yet. So for soul searching and keeping myself sane, I find other ways, creative ways to quench my soul and my thirst. More and more I find myself taking joy also in doing simple things around the house, beyond making complex objects and artifacts that I used to do, and I still would like to do very much in the future. Now I find myself trying more and more giving time to simple things like painting, sketching, and things I actually used to do when I was a child, and for example, painting this tool or building furnitures in my house. A couple of weeks ago, I was on a business trip in London and I met one of my ex-colleagues. He now works for Google DeepMind. We used to work together in VW. I'm not going to name him to keep him anonymous, but we were grabbing beer after work and he was working nearby, and we met for a beer and a chat. He comes from a very strong software design background. He works on the periphery of very advanced software development in terms of visuals. He works with GPUs. The things he tells me, I have no brain to understand. He writes code at GPU level to do very high resolution rendering and basically pushing the limits of graphics as we know it. For some reason, I don't remember how we started this discussion, but we started talking about the state of programming today, and that how we each started programming, our beginnings, and how some programming practices have become bloated as part of the evolution, and how different frameworks came about to be, different approaches, different mental models for various languages. We were discussing basic, fundamental, abstract ideas actually around programming and how it has evolved from the past to where it is now. Truthfully speaking, I'm pretty new in terms of my background in programming, just around a decade closing, so not that old and probably not that educated enough to talk about and discuss this subject. But as we've been coding since we were a child, I think this was a moment where we would say we connected. My nature is such that I like to not just stick with what I'm doing, I like to think where that thing came from and where it's going. So that thoughtfulness is there in my head when I'm doing something, and I always wonder and reflect why certain things are the way they are. And so I think that's one of those moments where my friend joined my internal chat. Two things forked out of that discussion, and one of them was around how we can simplify approaching programming actually, and he was actually working on that. Yet to learn more about this actually. And then the other thing that forked was when I mentioned to him that I think more and more I am drawn into doing simple things around the house for no reason. I mean, I like to collect works of my friends as well who are doing and building things like even like painting. I like to collect those works. I have friends who are new media artists. I like to have their work. I like to surround myself with creative works done by my peers and friends. And with that discussion, he mentioned that he also wants to, alongside all the programming that he does, wants to do simple things I would almost call it the thirst for tactile performance. Pardon my poetry here, or lack of poetry. So actually, I added to that and I said, why is it that programmers, more and more I see, are becoming very wary about programming? And we're not talking about frameworks and programming, state of programming. We're talking about why is that people and programmers specifically want to venture into the physical world, which was not the case before. When I say physical, I'm not talking about dabbling with hardware, but just like, to make simple things and like chairs, for example. Why is it that people who are working with software quite a lot are seeking this physicality in their everyday world, right? And I think, if you ask me, it has its roots in the history of how computer science evolved and the education system around it. I know I'm disconnecting from here with where I was going, but hear me out. So, computer science, the way it has been taught and still being taught, has isolated and separated the physical layer from the digital layer, and it created a gap, which is, my fear is that it's getting bigger and bigger. From a very early stage, we learn about computers that it's either about hardwares or softwares, right? And both of these parties don't talk to each other in the real world, but of course within the machine it does. As a software person, it is usually okay to not care so much about the hardware. Not everyone is the same, of course, but it's actually not true, right? Considering machines are actually finally running machine code at the end of the day, and programming languages, what they have actually done essentially is make it easier for us, and very much created abstractions to input those instructions into the computers. Like, this is what everyone knows from a very general understanding level. So essentially, we have created a huge gap in knowledge, I would say, between how computers actually work, and somewhere along the line, we lost the idea that these two are not actually separate ideas or mental models, that people should also be delving into these hardware, and I'm talking about specifically electronics of the computers, quite a bit. And so that's like one of my theories why programmers are missing hardware. And here I was, of course, talking about electronics, right? But let me now come back to it. This is the initiation of the desire. Now, if I think that this feeling gets amplified, that's my theory again, this feeling that we're missing something gets amplified over time, and later on when someone is spending a lot of time on screen and missing out on this physicality, translates into losing touch, or a sense of losing touch, a feeling of losing touch around the physics around them within the environment where they're in. So I think more and more programmers want to go back into that reality. If we think about it as humanity as a whole, we evolved from generations by sensing the world around us through touch and tactile feedback, alongside, of course, visual and auditory and olfactory feedback. We built weapons with which we hunted, we built houses, we farmed, we made furnitures, we made fire. So we have a long history with our relationship in the physical world and with the physical world. It's just encoded in our DNA and in our evolutionary memory. So it would be unnatural, and it is unnatural, for us to really cut off that relationship. But more and more I see designers, or anyone who essentially is so-called quote-unquote digitally oriented, are spending less time paying attention and being a bit less mindful, I would say, to the world around them. As a side note, when I wasn't using a smartphone, which was for a long time actually, my sense of direction was pretty good. Now my friends make fun of it that I have lost it completely. I'm a bad co-driver. Actually, later on I noticed that I'm not good at anymore like I was before. And so in Japanese it's called hoko onchi, or deafness to directions. So to sum it up and not spend more time on this, dwelling in that idea, I would say I think it's only normal that alongside our practice of spending time with computers and other digital entities, we also get drawn to spend time in our real time world and the physical world. It's almost like a spring reaction compressing back. And to that, I would say that we should start taking pleasure and try to maintain a balance by enjoying doing small, regular, mundane activities, possibly uplift them a bit with our human skills, the artistic skills that we have gathered over generations. Who knows, there might be a famous furniture designer buried somewhere in a Rust programmer.